Good afternoon, Team Edward and Team Jacob. Jesus, that's going back, that one. That's an old Twilight reference, that. I'm obviously running out of ideas. I'm going to have to call you plain old ladies and gentlemen soon if I'm not careful. Can't be having that. Anyway, my name's Danny Whittaker. This is My Own Worst Enemy, mental health podcast and all that malarkey. And a bit of a landmark episode today, boys and girls. Episode 10. We're into double digits. Really rolling now. So what's the next target? Maybe 50? See if we can survive that long. Jesus, that's a long way off. Anyway, one step at a time. So, today's episode, making another conceptual leap forward. So, last episode, if you listen to that, was procrastination with Tim Pitchell. And that was getting started with kind of practical aspects of mental health. So actually talking about things, techniques and tools that you can actually apply to your life. Turned out to be the most popular episode we've done so far as well, that one. Well, today I'd like to fulfill another aspect of my role as interlocutor of this podcast. And that's by exploring alternative and opposing viewpoints. So, we've already covered CBT, which is kind of the dominant psychotherapy in the UK. That was with Dr. David Burns, episode 3. You might want to go back and check that out, actually, before you listen to this episode, just to kind of put it into context. Because today, we're going to be talking about a lesser-known form of psychotherapy, at least here in the UK, anyway, as far as I know, and that's acceptance and commitment therapy, commonly referred to as ACT. And we're not just going to be talking to one of its proponents, but to the actual creator and founder himself, Professor Stephen Hayes. Now, before we go any further, probably a good time to make clear, just because I'm going to discuss this or that therapeutic approach or philosophy or whatever on this podcast, it doesn't necessarily make me a proponent of it. So, I mean, if academics want to square up to one another in scientific journals and whip out the statistics to compare sizes, that's fine. But that's not the game I'm playing with this podcast. From my own personal experience, I'm kind of less interested in who claims to be the best or what particular school of thought claims to know the most, and more interested in what options are available to me. On an individual level as a patient, instead of trying to kind of pin my hopes on any one particular approach, what I think is more important is to educate yourself broadly in different approaches, cherry pick the tools and techniques that work for you, scrap the stuff that doesn't, and then build your own personal toolkit of well-being. In this case, I do happen to think that ACT is brilliant, and it, along with metacognitive therapy, which is another approach I'd like to cover at some point, kind of helped me fill a lot of conceptual gaps that were kind of left open for me by self-administered CBT. And yeah, without it, I don't think I would have made as much progress as I feel I have done. So, with that little disclaimer out of the way, my guest today, Stephen Hayes, is the Foundation Professor at the Department of Psychology at the University of Nevada. He's the developer of relational frame theory, which is an analysis of human language and cognition, out of which he developed the aforementioned acceptance and commitment therapy. He's the author of more than 530 scientific articles and 38 books, including the #1 selling Get Out of Your Mind and Into Your Life. His TEDx talks, which I'll link to in the show notes, have been viewed 150,000 times on YouTube, and he's the recipient of numerous awards, including the Nevada Psychological Association Psychologist of the Year Award, a B.F. Skinner Award from Palo Alto University, and a Lifetime Achievement Award from the Association of Behavioural and Cognitive Therapies. In today's episode, we talk about the foundations of ACT and the limits of CBT. So what exactly is acceptance and commitment therapy, and how does it differ and improve upon traditional CBT? We discuss the concept of psychological flexibility and its role in either preventing or provoking the development of mental health issues. We discuss whether or not there's value in addressing issues from your past, the importance of self-compassion during periods of psychological distress, how to discover your own personal values, and, putting it all together in Steve's own words, how to back out of the war within, come into the present moment, focus on what we care about, and get on with the business of living. One thing I will say about this episode before we dive in, it's probably best not to listen while you're kind of like pottering about doing chores or bathing the dog or whatever, because Steve's a very smart guy. There's a lot of nuance and kind of multiple layers of analysis in a lot of what he talks about. So with this episode, it might be a bit more productive to kind of, take an hour, relax, pour yourself a brandy, sit down and really kind of soak it in, because with some of the things we talk about, it will be good to quite literally pause and reflect on some of the things he says and kind of think about how it might apply to your own thought processes. So that's my recommendation. You don't have to, whatever, I'm not bothered, it's up to you. Anyway, you can contact Stephen on Twitter. He's at Stephen C. Hayes, and that's Stephen with a V, and Hayes spelt Hayes. You can also visit his personal website. That's just stephenchayes.com. All these links, as usual, will be available in the show notes. And as usual, without further ado, please enjoy my conversation with Professor Stephen C. Hayes. Okay, Stephen Hayes, welcome to the podcast.
Glad to be here.
Before we get into the thick of it with talking about ACT, one thing I found quite interesting, the other day when I emailed you, one of the things I always tend to do is send over a bunch of questions to the people that I'm doing the interview with, because that's kind of been the thing that's been requested from me. But interestingly, when I sent you this email, you sent me an email back saying, like, basically, bullet points are fine, but I don't want the actual questions. And you sent me an article that you wrote from back in 1999 called The Hayes Plan, which is basically this kind of this idea to do with interviews and live discussions about not giving people the questions beforehand. And I found it really intriguing. And if you just kind of like talk about that a little bit, because the reason I ask is I've talked about in a past podcast, one of the things that's like I've kind of fell off the wagon recently with the anxiety and stuff. And one of the reasons for it was stressing out so much about making this podcast go the way I want it to go and coming up with all the right questions and trying to design it in the perfect way for the person I'm talking to. And also I think there's a bit of I've got a bit of an inferiority complex going on there as well, because I dropped out of high school and I'm talking to these people that are PhDs and all these kind of genius minds. And so when you sent me this article was saying just kind of, don't worry about the questions and don't offer up the questions, I thought, oh God, that'd be amazing if we could get away with it. So if you could just talk a little bit about.
Well, I think there's a time to prepare and know and look to the future, and there's a time not to, and your mind will pull you into a place where, in order to control the future, we have to sort of think it all out and worry it through, and actually. Very often you're in situations where that is not really what's called for. I mean, there's a difference between worry and preparation. And when we're talking about the kind of work that I do or the application of these principles and so forth, this is something where, we can stay with what life itself has given us. Think about what we're doing here. We're trying to serve an audience.
Yeah.
And if we over-prepare and we've thought it all through and we've shared our questions and answers and we're doing this little stage dance, what it means is that the audience doesn't get to see two human beings interacting in a way that they can relate to. Mm. And it may be very polished and so forth, but then it looks like this doesn't have to do with normal human beings. Either that or it's a performance, and of course it is a performance. So I want to be with you to see what's going on with you and how I can be of interest to you and your listeners, how I can be of service to them, and putting myself in their place where I'm hearing your questions for the first time, just like they're hearing your questions for the first time. You're hearing my answers, and you don't know exactly where I'm going either, allows us, I think, to serve the people who are listening. So that was my thought. And it doesn't mean that I don't prepare. If I'm going to give a TED talk or something, I'm going to practice it 50 times.
Yep.
But if I'm having a conversation, I don't want to practice it. I want to find out who the human being is who's talking to me. And I want to be able to engage you in a way that fits the moment.
Yeah, that's exactly the kind of feel I want to go for with this podcast. And kind of ironically, when you were saying it might give, really preparing for it might give a polished performance, it really hasn't, because I've got my set of questions to ask people, and then as soon as they maybe jump forward in the list that I've got, or answer a question that I haven't quite asked yet, I panic and I'm all over the place. And so I really do like the idea of just sitting down with someone and having a conversation. The problem is going to be is actually getting people to agree to that, because I've found that, like I say, most people want all the questions in advance. And why is that from a professional standpoint?
Well, I think it comes back to the core of the work that we're talking about. It's an experiential avoidance deal, probably wrapped up in a verbal wrapping that says it's about being prepared and serving others. But really what it's about is not feeling uncomfortable, not having to be afraid, not having to worry that you don't have the answers or that you'll be stretched beyond your normal limits. And, how do I know that? Well, if you look at worry and rumination, the two flip sides of looking to the past and the future, what drives worry and rumination, which are toxic, you can show that they predict, anxiety struggles and depression and so forth. What drives it, a chunk of it, is experiential avoidance and psychological inflexibility. But the cost is that what you just said is actually right. I mean, I probably did give it too much by saying maybe it gives you a polished performance, because Tom Borkovec and others who've studied this have shown that people who worry about the future do no better when they get there.
Yeah.
In fact, tend to do worse. But your mind's telling you, oh no, you got to be blah, 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 blah. And then the future shows up and you're still inside your head and you're not out there interacting with the world in a moment-to-moment way. And so you're handling that future present when it becomes present in a way that's less skilled than it would be if you just practiced on being present now. So when the future present arrives, you'll be practiced in how to be present there too. The problem with worry and rumination is what you're practicing is not being present and being in this verbally constructed past or future. Meanwhile, when you get to that future, you're going to be off in your head again. You're not going to be present for that present either. So what are you serving? I mean, your mind's telling you you're doing better, but you're not doing better. And meanwhile, you're missing what's right in front of you. It's very human. It's very sad. We're riding this tiger of human language and cognition, and it just masters us. I mean, there's a reason why we use the word dictator, the speaker, right? And taking dictation with the voice within just masters us as a kind of command voice. And if we're not careful, it'll suck all the energy out of our life's moments into manipulation of some future that may never come.
Well, I think you've kind of skimmed over give us a tiny little introduction there to quite a few of the concepts that we're going to talk about today. So
yeah, this acty space we're in.
Yeah. So before we get into the thick of it, if we could kind of just give people a brief summary of what ACT is, what it consists of, and kind of its basic philosophical underpinnings that we can then kind of go ahead and pass and get a little further into.
When you say philosophical underpinnings, you're playing with fire because you're talking to a geek, and very soon I'll be talking about functional contextualism and about what's truth, and there is a whole developed philosophy of science that underlies ACT. But maybe I can just start with the practical, and then we'll go into the geek if it's.
Oh yeah, definitely. I'm all for geeking out.
Oh, great. Essentially, what ACT is this combination of methods. It's really not a specific method. We're happy to borrow methods from other places. But the methods are always focused on a small set of skills, really, that we know empirically hang out together. Each one supports the other. So much so that you might think of them almost like sides of a box. And the box is what we call psychological flexibility. The sides are learning to watch your mind in flight with a sense of dispassionate curiosity rather than simply disappear into it. To open up to your thoughts, feelings, memories, and bodily sensations in a way that's more receptive and willing to see what's of use in there, but also willing to just let it be there if it's not of use. To come into the present moment in a way that allows you to attend flexibly, fluidly, voluntarily to what's present. From this place of consciousness that we all have, of this more open sense of you as a place of awareness, not you as your story that you tell, or your position that you have, or your differences and similarities to others. And then when we show up in the present in this conscious way, with our thoughts, with our feelings, can we direct our attention towards what brings meaning and purpose to our life's moments, the intrinsic qualities of being and doing that we want to put into our lives, and build habits of action that are built around them. I just said 6 different things. The labels for them in order would be diffusion, acceptance, flexible attention to the now, a transcendent sense of self, values, and committed action. And those 6 things all go together to make up psychological flexibility. Why would we focus on that? Because we have almost 1,000 studies, maybe even more, if we count the basic science of cognition that ACT is linked to, called relational frame theory, the component studies, the studies of processes, and the outcome studies. And what they show is that psychological flexibility is probably one of the most, if not the most important process of change in human psychology that determines whether or not you're going to develop a mental health problem, but on the flip side, whether or not you're going to be able to prosper in a positive sense. It predicts whether or not your problems, if you have them, will get more complex and chronic, or if you'll be able to move in a positive life trajectory and with your problems and your history. It's just such a central concept. And the reason is, here's why. We're dealing with organisms called us that have processes that are millions of years old. The ability to learn by consequences, for example, I think the best estimate is 540 million years old. Why do we know that? All of the creatures that evolved in the Cambrian period, which was 540 million years ago, can learn by consequences. And all of the ones before then can't. If you're a jellyfish, you can't learn. If you're a sponge, you can't learn that way. You have a habituation, which is a very primitive learning process. But if you're a spider or a snake or a dog or a cat or a human being, you can. But then this new dog shows up on the planet called human language and cognition. You have to guess how old it is because we know the chimpanzees don't do it in the way that we do it. Even the language-trained chimps don't show what a 12-month-old baby shows, and I can unpack that for you if you want to get into it. But maybe the hominids did, maybe the Neanderthals did, etc. We don't really know, but we know that Homo sapiens did. And so we're dealing with a process. Homo sapiens is only 200,000 years old, something like that. So we have this very new kid on the block, which is the voice within. And it is mastering us instead of us mastering it. It's just a tool. It's just a feature. It's just a part of us. It's there for all kinds of useful reasons. We can think and reason and problem solve. And we can also drive ourselves nuts, worried about the future or struggling with the past. looking within and saying, oh, I don't like that. Oh my God, what if I feel this? Or, oh, what's that? You say, see, if you feel that, that's going to lead to that, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Meanwhile, life's going on and our children are growing up and there's people to hug and things to do. And we're off in our freaking heads, fight war within. So ACT is about helping us to back out of the war within, come into the present moments, focus on what we care about, and get on about the business of living. I just said in simpler form what those 6 processes are. So
for people that maybe not familiar with it, a good comparison to make would be with CBT. That's kind of the fashionable therapy at the moment, and it's one everybody's familiar with. And that seems to kind of work in the opposite way that you've just mentioned, in that with CBT.
Well, so the claim is. The science doesn't say it really works in the opposite way, but that's the story. Yes.
Well, when I said it works in the opposite way, I mean in the sense that the practical application of it is to actually engage with that internal battle. And so ACT is kind of, from a practical standpoint, is precisely the opposite of CBT.
Yes.
If CBT is hands-on, ACT is hands-off. Is that a simple way of putting it?
Oh, I wouldn't say that. Well, yeah, in a way. But now let me just talk a little bit about this, because ACT is out of the CBT tradition writ large, out of the behavior therapy and behavior analysis tradition, which is where CBT originally started. But it has a different theory of language and cognition. And CBT was based on a clinical theory of language and cognition. ACT is based on a laboratory based. And I think it's actually a better, more developed, more scientifically elaborated understanding of what human language and cognition is. I mean, we can take, if I can do just a little bit of chest thumping before I answer your question, only 30 seconds.
Go ahead.
We can take relational frame theory, which is what is underneath ACT, and we can do things like do language training with kids who don't have language. We can raise your IQ. We can establish a sense of self if you don't have a well-established sense of self, like autistic spectrum disordered kids. We can measure the implicit processes that are going on in your mind better than anything out there on the planet, and including much better known methods. You can't do any of that with the theory underneath CBT. The theory underneath CBT is a clinical model of cognition. To be a little insulting, it's not too different from what your grandmother could have come up with, because she probably knows that you can make logical errors. You can think about things in goofy ways. Oh, don't worry about it, dear. Oh, you're overdoing it. It's fine, but it just turned out to not be sufficiently powerful, and in some ways to not be correct. Why? Because let's take an example. If you have a thought that is dominating you and it's based on a logical error, well, then you have to catch the thought that's happening. That's probably a good thing. That's being aware of your thinking in an ongoing way.
Sorry, Steve, could we pick out an example to actually?
Sure. So if you're dealing with, let's say, an anxiety disordered kind of situation, of course, I picked that randomly. It has nothing to do with the fact that I'm an anxiety disordered person in recovery. But if you pick out a thought like, oh my God, what would happen if I got anxious here? I'd probably make a complete fool of myself. I would probably make a complete fool of myself is probably a way overstatement of what the evidence would suggest is likely. In your life, how often are you, falling to the floor, quivering and drooling on yourself? I mean, it could happen. And frankly, if you engage with it in these unhealthy ways, maybe it's even possible. But most people, even in the depths of their struggles with anxiety, haven't had such things happen, at least very often. But, your mind can construct these horrible outcomes, and it'll give you a thought like that. Well, so in traditional CBT, you'd want to notice the thought, which requires a certain distance. The noticer and the noticee, you have to see the thought. And so Beck has this idea of distancing in there, which is probably a healthy thing. Separate yourself from the thought and see it, writing it down. Even before you do anything else, just doing that is helpful. If you look at CBT, you start getting movement in positive outcomes. By session 2, when people are just doing thought records and they've not done anything, other than behavioral experiments. Oh, let's just see if you really couldn't do anything or whatever the thing is without any correction of the underlying logical flaws. So the ACT folks are on with the CBT folks up to that point. In fact, we called ACT originally comprehensive distancing. It was say, well, let's just take Beck's idea of distancing, and what if we just did that on steroids? Just watch your thoughts, watch your thoughts, watch your thoughts, watch your thoughts, and now redirect towards what's going on and what's of importance. It was a terrible name. It sounds dissociative. ACT is a wonderful name. Comprehensive distancing was horrible. I'm glad we got rid of it. But then the next thing, once you've detected it and see it, is that you have to analyze it, see the error, dispute it, and change it. Well, here's the problem. Number one, it means now you have to focus on it. Why focus on that? I mean, that's one of the last things you'd want to focus on. That's the goofy part of you. I mean, yeah, sure. If you focus on it, which you're already doing, and now you're just having your therapist encourage you to focus on it even more, what about the children that are out there to be hugged and the wives to be kissed and the lives to be lived? And so there's that. There's an opportunity cost. We're now spending our time focusing on the goofiest things going on.
So,
right?
So it's almost like you'd already turned your attention inward, but now
yes.
you've kind of magnified that inward attention as well.
Yeah, for a therapeutic purpose, but of course you better pay off because you've got doing two things. You're shifting your focus within, and that really better pay off.
Right.
Because if it just gets you to focus your attention in, this sounds pretty familiar for an anxiety disordered person. I mean, I don't know if you were like me, Danny, but at the height of my anxiety struggles, 80-90% of my attention over the entire waking day
easily
was focused within.
Yep, totally, yep.
You know, I'm living on like a tenth of my, and it's amazing. I wasn't fired. I mean, I had work to do, I had things to do, and I'm completely watching out for the anxiety monster and the next little indication that he's going to come around the corner and all of that. Well, okay, so that's one. Okay, so then, but now the challenge and change part, it probably is a good idea to remind yourself, in addition to thinking this goofy thing, I could also think this other thing. That's fine. That's probably fine. That's cognitive flexibility, and that's an ACT. We actually have methods. Well, write your life story. Now write it differently with all of the feelings and all of the thoughts and all of the facts the same. That's fine. Cognitive flexibility. And it turns out cognitive reappraisal, which is in traditional CBT, which is changing your thoughts, is mediated, meaning it's the functionally important pathway, in several studies by cognitive flexibility and psychological flexibility. So it turns out that being able to sort of open up and think more flexibly, feel more flexibly, attend more flexibly, is part of what's been going on all the time in CBT. But the traditional CBT says, no, what you're trying to do is pick of those various thoughts the one that's more rational, and take the ones that are less rational and really build out the ones that are more rational. In other words, we have to not only just think flexibly, we have to grab the ones we like or the ones that we want or the ones that are healthier. Here's the problem. What that implies, and I know traditional CBT is not trying to do this, but man, you look at how it's applied, you look at how normal clinicians often do it, and you look at what clients do. What's implied is that the negative thoughts in some way need to be diminished, subtracted, or made to go away, and these good rational ones made to happen more frequently, and be more central. Wouldn't you say, Danny, that that's kind of at the core of CBT? We want the irrational ones. Yeah. Okay, well, here's the problem. As soon as you have a subtractive, eliminative, diminished agenda with your own thoughts, you now have plugged yourself into the wall socket of amplification of mental insanity, because there is no delete button in the human nervous system. There's no minus button in the human nervous system. We didn't evolve for that. There's a plus button and there's a multiplies button. Anything that ever happened to you in your life will be with you for the rest of your life, short of a brain injury or brain deterioration. Even forgetting, which looks like you're eliminating something, you can relearn the things you forgot faster if you had once learned them, which means it's somewhere in your nervous system.
Right.
You go to psychology and you ask them, what is the process of unlearning? And they're going to look back and say, there is no process of unlearning. There's extinction, but that's inhibition. That's not unlearning. If you learn something, if something happens, if you say something to yourself, short of a brain injury or some sort of mental deterioration like an Alzheimer's or something, it's going to be with you the rest of your life. So when you take this idea that I need to diminish, subtract, and eliminate, you're basically asking of your nervous system to do the impossible. Why do that? Why do that? Every time I notice a goofy thought, I now just say, oh, God, I'm back to my negative thinking. Okay, well, now I've got two things. I've got the negative thought, and I got another thought about how I did this negative thing. Am I now feeling uplifted and empowered? Am I not? No, I've just added to the thing I'm supposed to be subtracted from, right? If I then say, oh, no, what was I supposed to think? I was supposed to think this. Okay, I'll focus on that. Okay, but wait a minute. Language goes in two directions. When I now think this positive thought, it will remind me of the negative thought. My guess is, you know this, Danny, if you've ever tried to do relaxation instead of anxiety, if you listen to music that relaxes you, if you picture images that relax you, if you listen to the freaking relaxation tapes or do the meditation CD, okay, you watch it over a period of just a few weeks. As you begin to think of that image or play that song or do that relaxation tape, what flits through your mind? The very emotion or thought you're trying to get rid of.
Yeah, there's a thing kind of become anchored to it.
Yeah, it's now linked to it. It's related to it. There's a thing in psychology called relaxation-induced panic. And I don't know if you ever suffered with it, but I did. When I'm listening to these freaking relaxation tapes, eventually the relaxation tapes would remind me of my panic so much that if you said the word relaxation, I'd have a panic attack. You said the word relaxation, I'd have a panic attack.
Yeah, I've got a similar experience in the in learning meditation. Meditation for me became kind of this act of sitting down and trying to push thoughts out of my mind, even though I know exactly what the trick is with meditation. I know that it's to sit back and observe thoughts, but because my motivation wasn't to relax, it was to kind of attack the negative thoughts. That became a stressful situation.
A good meditation teacher in a course. This is in the MBCT in the right way, not in the way you just said it, of course. But normal human beings. Look, I got an email from a guy in Korea about a year ago who said, "I've been meditating my entire life. I'm 40-some years old. I just read the ACT book, and I finally realized what it is I was supposed to be doing." You can meditate to eliminate, to self-soothe, to run. You can do it in the same way you do it taking a freaking tranquilizer. I mean, you can meditate it as an escape strategy.
Yeah.
It's now, of course, a good teacher, if they detected it, would try to correct you. If you got a Zen teacher, he's going to whack you over the head with a stick, because of course that's not what it's for. But excuse me, we've got this mind in our head, this voice within, this problem-solving engine that's 100,000, 200,000, 2 million years old. It's not 500 million years old. And so, you're messing around with processes like the conditioning that underlies emotion and the automaticity of thoughts with this other newer process. And it's very hard to rein it in, because when you come in, a normal person, do an MBCT or MBSR or whatever. I mean, Jesus, it's even in the name. I'm sorry to bust John because he's so wonderful, but excuse me for the cursing. But
okay, that's away.
Mindfulness-based stress reduction. Come on, John. Reduction, that's subtraction. Stress, that's a negative emotion. You're telling people, if you become mindful, this emotion and collection we called stress is going to reduce and go away. That's the last motivation. I understand he had to do it to get people to come to his program, because that wasn't his first name. But it's toxic. It's dangerous. And so I think you're living out what normal people live out when they touch these ancient wisdom technologies, which at their best are about opening and becoming present. They were never meant to reduce or eliminate. That's not how they work. That's not what they're for. But when you put them in the health system and you label people with things like anxiety disorder, how the heck do you expect them not to think that your method that's going to be paid for by the National Health Service or whatever doesn't eliminate, reduce these kinds of things? And it's amazing that actually it often does do that. I mean, people do have fewer panic attacks. They do have, but ironically, the more they want that to be the outcome, the less it's going to be the outcome, because you now are doing two things, one of which is healthy and supportive, and one of which is getting in your own way. And the theory that's in traditional CBT, I'm sorry, is I don't think anywhere near as well supported as the theory underneath ACT. It's based on a theory of cognition that I don't think is anywhere near as well developed scientifically. I know some of my colleagues their hair is now on fire, but finally, it is dangerously close to things that we all know are toxic, like thought suppression, emotional suppression, etc. CBTers know that full well, but they're allowing these conversations to happen in a way that normal people use them for those purposes, and that ends up hurting people, or it's at least inert, if not actively negative. I must have had too much coffee here, Danny. I'm talking like a freaking.
Oh no, it's freak. Good. It's good. You
should have just given me a list of questions. I could be more.
Hey, no, as long as you're happy to sit here talking, I'm happy to sit here listening. Definitely. So you've got the first, second, and third wave so-called cognitive behavioral therapies. Is it this kind of a detached mindfulness maybe that separates the third from the second wave, CBT representing the second wave, and things like dialectical behavioral therapy and ACT in the third wave? Or is that too simple a distinction?
Well, it's close. Detached, has some connotations that get over to the subtractive part. So I use the adjectives of dispassionate curiosity.
Okay.
Earlier, and the reason I did it is that this distance that allows us to see what's going on cognitively and emotionally is in part so that we can learn from it, because there's things inside our negative thoughts or difficult feelings that actually are there, deep messages of our history and how they echo into the moment and so forth. So we don't just detach from them. We actually want to observe and describe and see them and make use of them. So the curiosity part, I kind of like that. Oh, look at that. My heart's doing this, and I feel like that, and I want to run. I'm having these thoughts. Look at that. The detachment part has this almost slightly defensive feel, as if we'll back up so that we can get away from, but really it's more back up so that we can see. I mean, if you were looking at a painting with your nose literally touching the painting, you're not going to see very much. If you backed up, you probably wouldn't say you're becoming detached from the painting. You're just allowing yourself to see the painting as a painting. It's not seen well when your nose is on the canvas. And it's the same way. This distance affords a kind of observation that can be useful to you. But often all you're observing is nothing more than the history that you know full well. I mean, you can catch in your negative thoughts, for example, things that your parents or siblings may have said to you at some particular time. You sometimes even hear it in their voice. If you've ever had, criticism that felt unfair, or from a teacher or a coach or whatever, those things will echo into your mind as you internalize them. And that's when you detach. Sometimes you just learn that.
Just out of interest, do you feel like, take a step back. For me personally, there's a lot of things to do with my anxiety, panic disorder and things that when I look back, I can't really attach it to anything. I can't really remember anything that might be the source of it. Do you think there is value in going back and searching for those underlying experiences?
Well, no. And we're historical beings. So yes, there's parts of your history that are linked to it. But frankly, the only part of your history we really care about is the past that's in the present, not the past that's in the past. So why go back and rummage through the back of the drawers? But because you don't need to, it'll come to you. I did a TED talk, a TEDx talk, on my a pivotal moment in my life, 34 years ago, sitting on a carpet thinking I'm having a heart attack and realizing I'm having a panic attack at 2 a.m.
Yeah, brilliant TED talk, by the way.
Yeah, thank you. And I tell the story of I was years into then carrying that forward into the ACT work. When what percolates up right in the middle of an ACT workshop is how powerfully the history of domestic violence in my home had impacted me. And I knew that my mom and dad had fought and stuff. I knew that. It wasn't all suppressed memories. But a specific memory came up that I just hadn't remembered. I don't think maybe you call it repression, but and it made so much sense of why my first panic attack, which happened watching full professors fight in a psychology department meeting, why it occurred. But it also made sense of why the panic path I was on had been so toxic to me, because it was taking this very vulnerable little kid part of me that wanted to make a difference and was deeply part of why I was a psychologist. Most people are psychologists because either their own stuff or something they saw was painful enough that they wanted to be in the world helping to solve those problems. And I know some of my motivation to be a psychologist goes back to watching my mom and dad not be able to fight their way out of, listen to that. That is, yes, an avoidance. Not being able to step up to the challenge of my dad's addiction and anxiety problems, or my mom's obsessive compulsive disorder and depression. And so, I don't think it's the case that, you need to figure out where it came from to deal with it. No, it's just emotions and thoughts that echo into the present from the past contain a message that can sometimes be useful. And here's the message. There's something going on now that seems relevant to then. Because, we don't have memories just out of nothing. I mean, something's triggering them, right?
Yeah.
Now, is that relevant? Is that meaningful? No, it could just be the coach ripping you in a football practice or something. It could have no meaning other than that bit of shame or that bit of pain. Somehow in this situation, you're reminded of it. Maybe an authoritarian figure showed up that's kind of like your coach. That's interesting, maybe not all that useful. Sometimes it's really important. Like, oh my God, the reason I'm a psychologist is linked to this process of wanting to make a difference. And of course I feel inadequate to it, just the same way that I felt inadequate when I was 8. But that's okay. That's part of the motivation. That's part of, so, in my own case, when I feel panicky or anxious when I'm about to go give a talk in front of a big group, let's say, that's an echo of my history that says what I'm up to here is to try to make a difference. And I'm feeling inadequate to it, just as I did long ago. And guess what? The people who are struggling feel inadequate to their stuff too. And so can I carry that vulnerability with me? It will reduce my tendency towards arrogance and narcissism. It'll actually help humanize what I'm doing. It'll help me put myself behind the eyes of the people I'm talking to. It's not my enemy to feel insecure. It softens me. And as I say in that TED talk to my 8-year-old towards the end, it says, I want you here with me. I'm not going to ask you to do the talk, but you soften me and you make sense of my life. Yeah. So the message isn't go back and figure out all the details of your history. The message is be with yourself in a way that allows your history that's being projected in the moment to be seen. And if nothing percolates up, then fine. Just stay open, and things will percolate up. You're an onion, and you're never going to be finished. You'll catch things that are linked. And if you don't, that's fine too. Meanwhile, you're living your life. So I don't know. Does that make sense to you, Danny, what I said? Or?
It does make sense to me, especially the part where you said the past, you only need to deal with the past that's in the present, not the past that's in the past. That's a very interesting distinction.
Yeah, exactly. We live here, not there. And not all parts of the past are relevant. I mean, there's you don't even know what you had for breakfast last week. I mean, please, the things that happened to you when you were a kid, most of that stuff will never percolate up. But there's a few things that probably should percolate up that you don't know yet. Just stay open. Don't force it. Because the voices that come from the past sometimes are very, very subtle voices. They're soft voices. And so it's really more a matter of being open and sitting inside the stillness of awareness that allows you to hear them.
Okay, what I'd like to do now is kind of pick a condition, a mental health condition, and then kind of attach it to some of the concepts contained within ACT, and especially if we could kind of run it through the 6 components of the therapy model as well. And the one I'm going to pick is panic disorder, and there's a couple of reasons. For that. One is, like I said, I'm kind of off the wagon and having the odd panic attack myself at the moment. You've got deep experience with it, but also, more importantly, a panic attack is the most kind of emotionally charged event you can have, and also it's a very physical event. And I think a lot of people that might be listening to this that have had panic attacks are saying, okay, I'm interested to see how you can be accepting of a panic attack and how you can distance yourself from it. But firstly, so these I've got here the cognitive and behavioral processes that underline psychopathology within ACT are the idea of cognitive fusion and then experiential avoidance. So how would the two of those manifest with panic disorder?
Well, the panic thing is a complex set of things. There's the physiological stuff you talked about.
Yeah.
And there's also memories in there. There's judgments in there. There's predictions in there. So there's a cognitive stream that's evaluative, judgmental, temporal, cause and effect, before and after. There's also your attentional processes are present. There's emotions beyond just anxiety. I mean, you may feel angry or sad or afraid, just other things other than just panic, period, end of story. That one thing will overwhelm the more subtle emotions that are sometimes there. You don't do acceptance work by wagging your finger and saying you should accept it. That's tolerance or resignation or toughing it out. And in fact, a lot of people with panic struggles have done that. They've white-knuckled it. They've toughed it out. And it hasn't been liberating to them. It's actually, if anything, cemented the whole process. Yeah. If I wanted a metaphor for it, and I actually used this in the TED Talk, although I had a long section, but the talk got too long, so I cut it out more. Really, I think people know that there's postures that you can be in that are effective and others that are less so. If I ask a person with panic disorder to show with your body you at your worst when dealing with your anxiety, just like as if you're a sculptor, you can't say any words, you can't tell me what it's like, you just have to show it physically with your body. And I've asked this of quite a number of people, thousands, and they may run, they may flop into a heap. Very often, their head goes down, their eyes close, their arms come up.
That's mine.
The waist. They may even go into fetal position. Okay. Well, what's the metaphor inside that? The metaphor inside that, closing your eyes, and your eyes even rolling up in your head, your attention is no longer external; it's now internal. Right. Your head going down and your arms coming up, you're now in a defensive posture. If you curl into a fetal position, an ultra defense posture, you can't do very much in that posture. Your arms and hands aren't out, right? Your head and eyes aren't up, right? So if I asked you, you at your best, when you're having anxiety, I mean other times, there are times that you're better with anxiety and you know it, and there are times when you're worse with anxiety. Yeah. Show me with your body, you at your freaking best that you know of, that you've ever actually done. And almost universally, people's head comes up, their eyes open, and very often their arms and hands go out. They may stand up, they may walk around, they may show that with the movement of their head that they can look at things. What is that saying? It's saying, when I'm open and receptive, and with my arms and hands out, what is that saying? And able to go and do and interact with your heads up and your eyes open. What is that saying? When you're aware, when you're here, when you're present, when you can see, when you can direct your attention towards what's of importance. In other words, people already know what's healthy and worthwhile. They've experienced it, and they know what isn't. They've experienced that too. The problem is they have this little thin cortical overlay, this couple 100,000-year-old to 2 million-year-old process that's constantly the voice within telling them, this is terrible, this is awful, this is going to lead to this, watch out, what's going to happen, blah, blah, blah. So look, the kind of acceptance we're talking about is not white-knuckling it. We're talking about adopting a psychological posture that's same as the physical posture. And in fact, if you want to try it, actually, during a panic attack, adopt that physical posture. Put anxiety in front of you, put your arms and hands out wide, pick your head up, open your eyes, and look at what's there. What does that panic attack look like? Where is it located? How big is it? What color is it? How fast does it go? How heavy is it? What does it remind you of? Are there any voices attached to it? Or some of the voices of your mother, your father, your parents? What is it saying? Bring all those voices in. Are there quieter voices that aren't there? Look around. Are there emotions you don't see? In other words, open up to what's going on in your body. Open up to what's going on in your mind and your emotions and your history. And then let's just be present with it. Don't do it with a time clock, constantly like, oh, this is not making the anxiety go away. Making the anxiety go away is going back into that fetal posture. Come on out. Let's just look. Let's just be here. So to link it up, the word acceptance, the root of it, the septary part of it, is a Latin root that means to receive. And it was used originally, it included the connotation of to receive what's offered as if to receive a gift. It's still in English. You can take a gift and give it to somebody and you say, here, would you accept this? Versus they accept the gift, right? Acceptance isn't arms closed, kind of, oh, I guess I have to accept it. Dude, if you went to somebody, gave them a gift, and leaned back, closed their arms, made a Grinch face, had their head come down and said, I guess I'd have to accept it, you'd take back the freaking gift.
Yes.
I'm not giving it to you, right? Okay. What if inside this big pile of pony poop called your anxiety, there's actually gifts in there? At least it's the gift of your history. At least it's the gift of life and feeling. I guess your feelings are still working. You're feeling anxiety. When you're dead, you're not going to be feeling anxiety. There's something, at least that gift, but maybe even more. Bring your head up, open your eyes, put your arms out. Be yourself. I'm feeling anxious now. The I'm feeling is a gift. The now is a gift. And who knows, anxious may be a gift. Have there ever been times when you've been anxious, when that emotion has been very useful to you?
Well, yeah, I suppose kind of what we were talking about before. When in the early days of doing this podcast, before I started letting it really get to me, the anxiety, it made me feel prepared, and it made me do my research to the best of my abilities. And
you betcha. And you can show it empirically. And can you name an emotion where that isn't true? Is there emotion? Can you pick any emotion where, like, this emotion isn't under some circumstances an ally to me in my life?
Yeah, no, I can't. No.
Can't either. I can't either. Okay, so here's the problem. Your mind's going to tell you that it's like something out of that movie, The Matrix. It's going to tell you that, life is only going well when you've sufficiently subtracted these things. if you had the magical chemical, if you had the machine that you could plug into, we all are probably so stupid that we would do that even to the point of losing the gift that's inside that. We don't get to pick and choose. If we're going to feel anxiety, we need to be open to it and its messages. And yeah, sometimes its messages are not very interesting. Okay, well then let's attend to other things and have it come with us. But if you're going to adopt a posture of closed off, where does that end? I mean, I'll give you an example, Danny. If you have had a death of somebody very close to you and you're overwhelmed with grief, within a week, one of your friends is going to offer you a tranquilizer. If you go to a physician, they'll probably do it. That's how stupid we are. I mean, the idea, it used to be at least you had to wait like a couple months. Modern society will tell you, a week is too long. You can be married to somebody for 30 years, and if they die, when is it gone?
I think, quite literally, hasn't the most recent edition of the DSM?
Yes.
What's the time limit you've got according to that? Is it about a month or 2 weeks or something?
Yeah, it's down to 2. I think it's down to 2 weeks. Yeah. They actually took it down to some insane number that doesn't fit the evolutionary history of human beings. What are you thinking? Well, and if you don't get what's going on here, you just take something like antidepressants. Antidepressants aren't antidepressants. They're made, they're really forms of tranquilization. And how do you know that? Well, they don't just bring the bottom up, they bring the top down. If you collect measures of joy, you could market them if people would buy them. I guess they wouldn't, as an anti-joy drug, because they'll bring the top down too. And so we're swimming in a stream in which we have this almost anti-life agenda driven by commercial interests that have sold us on it, that, we're supposed to be happy, happy, joy, joy, but really what they're selling is the happy numb. What they're trying to sell is this idea that thinking and feeling is your enemy when you don't like it. But coming back to your challenge. Okay, so when anxiety shows up, what would happen if you could soften your posture? And I'm doing it as a metaphor because you're giving me a challenge of something I could do just in minutes. And psychologically, even physically, it would help. Open yourself up to what's present in that moment. And when your mind judges that, like, oh my God, that's terrible, open yourself up to that too. It's like listening to a little kid who's chattering on, like, oh, thank you. That's an old message. Hello, mind, my old friend. It's trying to help you. It turns out it can't help you in this area because it doesn't know how to be present. It doesn't know how not to judge. This logical reasoning, problem-solving mode of mind is all about how do I get from here to somewhere else and to compare the solutions. That's what problem-solving is about. But instead, let's bring this repertoire of observing and noting in this more attitude of dispassionate curiosity. And, let's just see. Let's just note the thoughts. Now, there's lots and lots of methods inside ACT that will help to diffuse from this chattering monkey mind that we've got and let it do its chattering so you can see it just the way you'd look at an object, also with an attitude of dispassionate curiosity, of sort of noting your mind talking. To do that, it helps to catch this awareness part of this. I here and now am aware. You are not just your thoughts. They are within you. You're kind of like a table on which many things have been placed. They're part of you. They're part of your history, but they're also distinct from you. And this part of you that shows up, that's there when you meditate, if you do that, or there when you go back to an old memory and you remember that person, that little boy behind your eyes, that part of you has the capacity to notice, as I say, with this attitude of dispassionate curiosity. When we're there, can we also now direct our attention towards what we want to bring into the world in our behavior, the intrinsic qualities of being and doing? And for example, if part of what's of importance is being kind and compassionate to others, could we start with yourself? Could you bring some kindness to this moment? You, a person struggling with anxiety and panic, can you bring some self-compassion and self-kindness to your awareness? And, treat yourself the way you would treat another person. And if it goes back a long way, I often ask people to think of the way you might treat a child who's afraid. You probably wouldn't slap them and say, snap out of it.
Yeah.
You'd probably get with them and listen, maybe show them by your very attention that they're worth attention and that you're not going to run away, that you'll be there with them. And in the same way, can you be with yourself that way when you're feeling vulnerable, weak, afraid? And then what else do you want to bring there? Part of your anxiety when it was linked to preparation was to bring something into the lives of others, of people who are struggling, as you know how to struggle, through these podcasts, to bring things that are worth their attention, that will lift them up in some way. Yeah.
So this would be linked to the values. Yes. Part of the core components.
Yeah, and values is tricky because it's very close to that word evaluation, which is almost anti-values. What I'm talking about are the chosen qualities of being and doing, the just cause, between me and the person in the mirror, not because mama will applaud or because otherwise I'd feel guilty, not because I should or I'm supposed to or I have to or it's written down somewhere, not because otherwise I'd tell the story, but because I know when I get centered, this matters. This is something of importance. Yeah. And often you'll find it very close to the places that you get afraid because we hurt where we care and we care where we hurt.
Yeah, one of the things that you've said, which really kind of stuck with me, is when it comes to a lot of people would say that they don't know what the value. How do you identify your values? I don't know what mine are. And you say about finding where the pain is, and then flipping it over, and you'll find your values.
There's 3 ways in. Think of your really sweet moments in your life.
Yep.
And then unpack them, and you're going to find values there. Think of the really painful moments of your life. And then flip them over, and something was violated, something was threatened. What was it? Or who are your heroes? Who are the people that, not just because of the things, but because of who they are, so what they represent or what they stand for, there's something in there that resonates deeply to you. So those are the 3 quick ways to values: pain, sweetness, and connection, or the heroes that we have, and all of them inform us. If you try to figure out what your values are, after all, things can change. It's not like what they are, and it can become very judgmental. People write down what they think they're supposed to.
Yes.
Now, frankly, here's the deal. You can only care about so many things, and so maybe you're supposed to care about the starving children in Bangladesh, but if you're not writing a check for it, I don't believe it.
Yeah.
But forgive yourself for the fact that you're not actually actively caring about everything. You only have so many life's moments. What if everybody actively cared about the things they cared about in the world of behavior? Wouldn't the world be a lot better? And maybe, who knows, there's not enough caring to go around. Maybe there's not enough caring for those starving children. But my guess is there is. But let's start with what you care about, with what you care about, with what you care about. And let's get about the business of living and loving, of being and doing in the way that you want to be, not in the way that your critical voice says you have to be, or you'll do that later when you no longer get afraid, when you no longer have panic, when you no longer feel depressed, when you no longer have urges, when you no longer feel guilty. I mean, you'll put life on hold for the rest of your life behind that process. And ACT is about, let's live now.
Yeah.
It's funny. People tell me that sometimes you actually see it. Somebody wrote a story about ACT and the title was Hello Darkness. And I thought, dude, okay, I get it. But on the other side of opening up arms wide to the pain within, you're just a millimeter away from the joy and connection within. And when you're in that posture, you can turn towards and have your hands free to actually do something about the the things that you love and care about, whatever it is, and the people that are here to be served in the time that you have on the planet. So that's the values. And the committed action part is let's build habits. So if you go back to your challenge, at the moment that you step forward in a kind, self-compassionate way, come into the present and turn towards what's important, like that. Let's say you do it with yourself right inside an anxiety struggle, and you're now reading about that next person on your podcast so that you can be a little more sophisticated in what you do with them, let's say.
Yeah.
You just built a tiny little habit of values-based action. You just took a moment and you added something to your life. If you then consciously do that process, walk that process over and over again, and build those habits into larger and larger patterns, now mindlessness can be your friend, because even when you're not watching, you're doing things that are values-based. Why? Because we're creatures of habit. We do what we've been doing. And when you're a person in the middle of an anxiety struggle, you've been doing a whole lot of experiential avoidance and cognitive fusion and playing small and living in a cage. And so, excuse me, it's going to take you a long time, maybe the rest of your life, to really build out full habits of living that are based on self-kindness and of concern for others and living your values. But nobody's keeping score. You're not going to get a blue ribbon at the end. There's not a speedometer glued to your head. Come back, be kind, step forward, step forward, step forward. And what happens is often people are surprised themselves. There's a lot of stuff you can do. Your mind will come back and then say, oh, see there, you're not going to have to ever be anxious anymore. Now it's behind you. Now your whole life is going to be about serving. Oh, bull, that's the same voice.
Yeah.
It's the same voice. It's just a different string of words that walked you into panic disorder in the first place. Don't turn your life over to that voice. It's not safe. So I don't want to turn my life over to the voice about how great and grand I am, how much life is moving forward. Bull. Come back in a humble way, right? The word humble comes to the word for dirt. Plant your feet in the dirt and step forward, step forward, step forward. And let's see. If you're not running as fast as the next guy next to you, fine. You're still moving forward. And that's the whole ACT message. I don't know if I've done enough to really link it to panic and anxiety, but I hope I've...
No, that's absolutely perfect. So we've got 6 minutes. If we can squeeze in some of these philosophical questions. They're supposed to be kind of quick fire, but we'll see how we go. So besides your own, do you have any book recommendations, either on this topic or anything else you feel would be of value to people listening?
Well, I do, there's many, many, many ACT books that are not mine. And I would start, if you're interested in something in here that really resonates. I mean, some of the popular ones, I think Russ Harris's work is really quite good. The Happiness Trap, for example. Get Out of Your Mind Into Your Life is the one that I have that's sort of generically useful. If you have a particular area that you're struggling with, almost any major issue now has ACT self-help books that are there. I do think also, depending on your approach, some of the wisdom traditions, if you connect to it, the kinds of things that are the Thich Nhat Hanhs of the world, and also some of the contemplative practice traditions, I think, can empower the ACT journey. The kind of things that the MBCT folks have written, Mark Williams and Zindel Siegel, and spiritual leaders like the Radical Acceptance book.
Tara Brach.
Yeah, Tara Brach. She actually came in contact with the ACT work years ago, and when she wrote that book, sent me a copy and said, thank you for your connection to it. And she's actually done talks at our conferences and things like that. So those are some places to start. There's also, if you're actually on this journey and reading ACT Self-Help, there's a very nice human community in a little Yahoo group called ACT for the Public. There's a link, it's free, out of the website for the Association for Contextual Behavioral Science. And it will help you in your journey if you're following this, because you can always ask a question, and other people who are on the journey. I mean, there's therapists on there. I read everything that's been on there, but I just love watching the normal people lift each other up, because this is nothing fancy. As I say, you could put your body in the posture of avoidance and fusion, or acceptance and diffusion. So you already have wisdom within. It's just a matter of liberating.
Yeah, I think it's always helpful to kind of share your experience with other people, even if it's just to know that you're not the only one going mad. That's the way I look at it. Right. So, what's the best piece of life advice anyone's ever given you? My mind immediately went to my mother, who died a couple of years ago. And I can hear her towards the end of her life saying it the way she sounded then. She didn't usually sound like an old lady, but towards the very end of her life, she had that little kind of old lady's voice. And I can picture her even then saying, "Be yourself, dear. Be yourself." Really, that's the challenge. The challenge in living, and this is inside the ACT model, all I'm really talking about is being yourself. Yeah.
Not the self that your mind tells you are. I don't mean be your story. That's ego. I don't mean, and it's as dangerous, whether it's in the form of narcissism as it is if it's a form that I'm the worst of the worst and the lowest of the low. It doesn't matter if you're a mental patient or Donald Trump. Both of these voices, you build them out, are dangerous. The self I'm asking you to be is this kinder, more humble, more in the moment, whole self, with all of your flaws and difficulties and all your joys and potential. And so that'd be it.
I like it. Final three. What part of your career are you most proud of?
Well, intellectually, the achievement that I think will last the most is probably relational frame theory. I think we have a way into language and cognition that is different than anything that has been on the planet before. Almost everything in ACT has been on the planet before. But the technical analysis of language that's inside relational frame theory looks like a new contribution. It's kind of remarkable because it's so simple. If you really know psychology, I can tell you the theory in a very short sentence, which is relating as an operant. So relating is an operant. That's 4 words. So that's my 4-word contribution to a life that you could put on my tombstone. I think it's probably the best thought I ever had. But I would say I'm also very proud of the community that's organized around ACT, and not just ACT. Contextual behavioral science is an approach to science as a community of about 8,500 people worldwide. And yeah, ACT often brings people in, but we've been able to create a very supportive community that is accepting of diversity, non-judgmental of others, that is values-based, and is building bridges between the behavioral sciences and evolution science and biological science and social science and cognitive science. And that's different, and that's a power. And I had a role in that. I had a role in building that community. And I think the community will last long after I'm gone and long after I'm forgotten. But I hope inside the contextual behavioral science community is not just the intellectual part, but the social part of organizing in a way to help us step up to the challenge of the human condition.
Yeah, it's certainly an impressive contribution. I mean, it's one thing to become a psychologist, psychiatrist, and be involved, but to create an entire school of thought is, it's something else entirely. Speaking of which, outside of family and academia, what investment of time or money has brought you the most joy or fulfillment?
Outside of family and the academy.
Yeah. Family and work, it's because they're the two things that I think people kind of default to, quite rightly, but yeah, outside of those.
Well, the things that come to mind actually link to that, because, I mean, like I enjoy playing my guitar. I enjoy driving around on my boat. I enjoy buzzing around on my motorhome. But part of what I enjoy about that is family. And I have a little message that I put at the bottom of all my emails, which is, it's at the end of that first TEDx talk, which is, love isn't everything. It's the only thing.
Yes.
And so not just family, but of humanity and of life itself, the things that bring me into nature and the moment and the world and beauty, and in a way that shares with others. That's really, in fact, it's a lot of what's underneath the clinical work I do and the science work that I do is there's something very sweet about it. That contextual behavioral science community is a sweet community. We play and, we have a thing called the Follies. We do these big kind of songs and jokes and stuff at our conferences. We dance and have fun and remember what life is about. So,
well, you may have preempted my final question, which was, it's the biggest one. What do you think is the key to happiness?
Happiness is tricky because it easily can flip over into judgment. Oh, I'm happy now, but soon I won't be, or I just doesn't feel happy, and chasing happiness that way is one of the sure routes to not be happy. I think the essence is, if you wanted to distill down the whole act, work, and so forth to a single word, it would be love, and if to a single letter, it would be be. And I would take both of those as pretty good definitions of happiness, if by that we mean something more like eudaimonia, something more like being in the world in a way that dignifies life's moments of loving and learning and contributing, and underneath that, just being.
Perfect. Steve, it's been a real honor speaking to you. Very interesting. Is there any links, any websites you'd like to direct people to that you haven't already mentioned that I can include in the show notes?
Oh, sure. They can visit my website, stephenchayes.com, or they can go to the ACT channel on YouTube and see some things that we put there. And the Association for Contextual Behavioral Science has links to resources for the public, including the listserv link that I mentioned, if you've forgotten it, some of the various kinds of things, and including if somebody wants to find an ACT therapist worldwide. There's almost 4,000 of them listed there on the website. And so, sometimes having professional help can also help walk through these kinds of processes. They're not hard, but they're tricky, and the mind is constantly talking.
Yeah.
So it sometimes helps to have a guide.
Okay, perfect. Stephen Hayes, thank you very much.
Thank you, Denny. It was great.
As always, if you'd like to comment on this episode, you can do so at myownworstenemy.org/podcast. That's also where you'll find all the show notes and links to any relevant information. If you'd like to contact me, I'm Danny D. Whitaker with 2 T's on all the various social medias. If you'd like to send me an email, you can do so at danny@myownworstenemy.org. If you'd like to support this podcast, you can do so by sharing links to your favourite episodes with your friends on Facebook and Twitter. And also, you can subscribe via iTunes, YouTube, SoundCloud, Stitcher, and TuneIn Radio. Just search for My Own Worst Enemy. So, as always, until we meet again, behave yourselves, but not too much, and I'll see you again next time.